right. Well, I think it's about time to start. So welcome everyone. It's always a pleasure to see the Smashing community, the community here, kind of meeting randomly every now and again, just dropping by to see what things are like and exploring. And I'm very, very happy to have Denys with us today. And Denys is a staff engineer at GitLab. He is, I don't even know how to kind of introduce Denys, because I've known you, Denys, now for, I don't know, like a century?
11 years to be precise.
Oh, you've been counting.
Yeah, like I just remember when we met. It was the conference in Oslo in 2011. So yeah,
that should be it. Yeah. So and Denys actually has so many different hats. I don't know which one you're carrying today, but he's an illustrator, he's a designer, he's also a developer, he's also a staff engineer, he's also a DevOps kind of person. Now, like, what is going on? Then don't you want to just settle in, just do one thing? No,
yeah, that's what happened. What happens to people when they don't know what they want to do in their life and where their lives go to. So yeah, yeah. I used to think about myself as just the developer, just engineer. But yeah, I've had a lot of periods in my life when I was concentrating one thing and then like switching to another thing and then to another thing. And now, as you've mentioned, I've settled on being a staff engineer in DevOps, working with DevOps product. So it's, like it's one of those things that to me, before I joined GitLab, DevOps was something that, like it's always in my head. And I constantly think, well, I have to read about this. I have to figure out what is this, like what this DevOps thing is. And then like, you always find some other things to do, right? More interesting. Let's be honest, more interesting things than DevOps.
Is there anything more interesting than DevOps, Denys?
Well, I have a lot of news for you.
Well, do you see that the number of people coming in is stopped, right?
Yeah. So. No, DevOps is great. DevOps is great. We will get to it. Oh, and now there are more people now. Okay, DevOps is great. No, it works only one time. Okay.
Yeah.
But when I joined GitLab, I just start, whether you want it or not, you have to start understanding what this product does and how this product works and why this product exists in general. And then I started getting into this DevOps things and figuring out why is it interesting and how can this be used in the number of projects, in the number of different products. That's kind of where I am at the moment.
Yeah, and look where you ended up, in a Zoom call.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, this is how
let me tell you, there are so many people ending up in the Zoom calls these days.
Yeah, but not a Zoom call about DevOps necessarily, but yeah, we'll be talking about this as well. So maybe now just a quick note from your end, as if I understand correctly, you're now connecting from Norway, is that right?
I am connecting.
This is where you happen to live as well. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your journey, like professional journey. How does one person who is, happens to be a good illustrator and then front-end developer ends up working on a DevOps team in Norway?
Well,
well, maybe a short version.
We have only 1 hour, right? Okay.
Yes.
Just to make sure. Yes. Without any like, I've been in the industry since what, about 2002, 2003, so about 20 years by now. And yes, first of all, I started as a backend engineer, as programmer. So I started learning programming languages, and my first language that I started learning was Perl. And oh man, like I still remember that camel book that I had back in the days from O'Reilly, and that book made me cry so many times because it was just very painful for me to understand that. But then I figured out, I found this Designing with Web Standards by Zeldman and Mayer, and that book completely turned the world for me. And back then I was living in Ukraine, And obviously, it was back in the days, it was nearly impossible to get proper English book in Ukraine. So it was, I confess, I just printed it out and made the book by myself. So, but I paid to the authors. Later, I bought the real edition of the book.
You paid
So,
forward, basically.
Yeah. So I learned in order to earn money to pay for the book. So that thing turned the world for me, because previously I was I graduated the art school, so I always wanted to work with something that is aesthetically pleasing, that helps people sort of that people enjoy working with. So I switched to front end, and it was the design, then CSS, then JavaScript, and now it's all sorts of like architecture and things that, like, all those boring things that the staff engineer is responsible for.
Right.
So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the short story.
So I'm wondering at this point, maybe I think that, by the way, everybody who is joining us today as well, this is not just about me asking Denys questions. I have some questions prepared just in case, but I'm very much looking forward to your questions. So if you have any particular thing that you would like to ask, that would be your opportunity as well. Feel free to just drop in a message on chat, or just speak up, turn on your audio and video, and then just ask. In the meantime, maybe just to kind of set a setting here, Denys. So maybe you could tell us a bit more about, what do you see, like what would be a good definition of what DevOps is, and when, and I would say why companies need it?
Right. This is a very good question, because there is no there is no strict definition of what DevOps is. Technically, DevOps is just the set of practices and techniques that different projects or products can employ in the life cycle of the development. So it's the set of techniques to help gain control over the whole process, the whole life cycle of your product. It's one thing. Another thing is that DevOps provides the mechanisms of joining this the development teams, and the IT ops, the IT operations teams together, so that the product would benefit from this collaboration. So previously, like before the DevOps, right? The process of the life cycle of the product could look like developers develop a feature, then they hand off in more or less big projects. They hand off this code to, let's say, the security team for analysis, because before the code is written, security team cannot analyze the code because the code doesn't exist. So it was quite iterative process, quite linear one, where where mistakes figured out. Like let's assume we have the timeline, right? So from this, so this is left for you. Okay. Yep. So it's swapped now. So from left to right. So here we start developing a feature. Here we release it to the customer. So if we use it linear, so we start developing, we develop, then we hand off to the security team, and then security team makes the analysis and says, oh man, this doesn't work. This should be fixed. It sends the message back all the way back to the beginning of this line, and the process continues. So this delays the push of the feature of the product, and this becomes pretty expensive. So identifying problems all the way on the right is very, very expensive. So what DevOps does is it provides the mechanisms of combining these things. So we at GitLab imagine this as the sort of the infinity sign. So it's the ever-going process where things from this far right end are moved much more closer to the left, and not only moved to the left. Like, how can we move to the left? As I said, security engineers cannot start testing the code before the code is written. We start moving this by automating the process. So once we start analyzing the code, for security issues, for code quality very early in the process using the automated tools. And this allows us to make this collaboration between the development and the IT operations much smoother and catch things much early in the process. So what does this give us? What's the benefit here? Obviously, the cost of a mistake is very low in this setup. So we, when we talk about this linear process, it's also, we have to also keep in mind that once the problem gets to the security team, for example, all the way on the right, the developers on the left of the timeline might have completely lost the context of the
they might have moved on already at this point, right?
Yes, so they can have completely they pushed off the thing and they completely forgot about what that was about. So when the security team comes back and says, well, we have to fix this, they have to it takes some mental power to get back into this mood, what was meant for this feature, how this feature is supposed to work. It's not a big deal when there are just a few features, right? But if it's a big enough product, a big enough project, it takes a lot of time and frustration for the developers because they have to put on hold the current tasks, get back to that task that they have completely lost the context for. So it's not very comfortable situation for the developers and for the whole product. So by combining these things, by automating, we allow developers catch things early in the process while they're still in the context. And then when this whole process goes to, for example, to release, to production, then we can involve the monitoring team that monitors the process. And then again, after something is identified on the monitoring side, we go through this infinity loop again. But because the process is automated, this whole process is very fast, and DevOps technically allows us to really shorten the time to market. So from the time developers begin developing a feature to the moment, like very short feedback loop, really. First of all, we have the feedback loop in the automated tools. So automated tools will yield right away if something is wrong, but also feedback loop to the real user who will get feature much faster. And it's really interesting because DevOps didn't come up out of silo. It wasn't just something that came out of nowhere. Came out of Norway. Definitely not Norway. We had different methodologies for product development and project development, right? Like we had Agile, we had Scrum, we had Kanban, and DevOps is. This is pretty important to understand. How does DevOps relate to this methodologies? And in this way, DevOps is not revolutionary. It's definitely evolutionary. Moreover, we can use Scrum, we can use Kanban integrated into the DevOps processes. Because if we really simplify the process. So Scrum is more about doing the things. So you have these sprints, usually like 2-week sprints. You work on one feature, and it's pretty iterative process, right? So you work on one feature, you release it, work, release, work, release. Then Kanban brings order to the planning stage. So you have the Kanban board, you have the cards, and then you can, for example, plan your sprints, get to the Scrum mode, let's say, and then spend 2 weeks working on a sprint based on the planning from the Kanban board. And what DevOps does is it allows these things to be incorporated into the DevOps, so they do not contradict each other. And for example, again, in GitLab, for example, we we provide Kanban boards for the planning stage because every project starts with planning, right?
Right.
And Kanban boards are really great tool for planning. So why not to use this? And so DevOps doesn't have any strict definition. It just provides the, let's put it, the environment for the best practices that have been out there before DevOps, so that it just provides this glue how to incorporate those things into the life cycle of the project.
Right, but then Denys, can you hear the voices from the remote corners of the web telling, but we were told that it's all about Kubernetes and it's all about
Oh, yeah.
Kafka and it's about Docker and it's all about all those dark things that dark sides of the web have,
Right.
where there are people looking at really like dark mode screens, operating some Docker's containers and pulling out things. And how does that relate to DevOps?
Pretty directly, let's be honest.
So it's not just a set of principles or practices or
No,
methodologies. It's more. It's a bit more than that.
Let's try to split to dissect the DevOps. So the DevOps, we said this is the set of principles, but this set of principles is based on the pretty well-defined stages or like milestones of a project's life cycle. So let's say, as we said, we always start with planning. Then from planning, when we're done with planning, we go to the development, to creation of a project. Then we have to run tests to make sure that our product is actually working and functional. Then we have to, once we figured out that, okay, everything seems fine, we just go on and we release this we push it to production. Then again, this is more or less ideal picture, right? Then the security team needs to double check the things. And then we have to, after this is all done, we also have to introduce the monitoring tools so that once something happens to our product, we get notified as soon as possible to minimize the damage caused by any bug or some regression that has been implemented and we overlooked it. So there are different stages here. And when we talk about DevOps for that or another project, this doesn't mean that a project needs to follow all of these steps. Definitely not. The project, there are projects that technically do use DevOps. They just don't know that they are using DevOps because nowadays it's pretty common thing to have the CI/CD pipelines, for example, for projects, right? And this is one of the cornerstones.
We don't use FTP anymore?
Well, sometimes, let's put it this way.
Okay.
But
okay.
We do run the continuous integration, continuous deployment, continuous delivery. This is the core part of the DevOps. But when we get back to your original question about Kubernetes and Docker and all these funny words that emerge recently. So
I wouldn't say funny, they're more scary, if you ask me.
Well, okay. I mean, funny in terms of it's one of those things. Like, at least my relation to them is the same as I used to have with DevOps. It's something that always sits in my mind, and I constantly repeat to myself, you have to read more about this, you have to read more about this, but you never have time for that. But technically, again, depending on the size of the project, depending on the complexity of the project, you can be totally fine without using any Docker, any Kubernetes. So you just go in this infinite loop. So you release, you monitor, you scan for security issues, and then if something arises, you go back to planning, and like you go in this thing. And there is not necessarily there is a need for containers like Docker, or even orchestration of those containers like Kubernetes. But then let's start small. So what does Docker bring to the plate of DevOps? If you're working with more or less big project, you probably will have different environments for a project. So you will have like development, you will have staging, you will have production. And what you really want to do is to make sure that your project behaves and works exactly the same in all of these environments. Achieving this without Docker containers is nearly impossible because all those environments will be run on different hardware, different software. So you have to, you really want to make sure that you provide exactly the same environment for a project, no matter the environment. And that's what Docker is for, really. So it's the shared container. It's the container that you can share with different environments. You can download the image and provide it to another developer. Developer will run the image. Docker will create the container for them locally, and they will get exactly identical environment to the one you have on your machine. And that's where Docker is great. So it allows to send things to different environments. But then if you work with really big projects where you have to deal with things like load balancing, for example, or where you have where your project starts experiencing scalability issues. So not like vertical scalability where you can like add RAM to your or more CPU power to your server, but real horizontal scale where you just need more servers in order to help the users and keep the performance at bay, for example. So when you need this horizontal scale, this is where Kubernetes comes into play. So imagine your server is one Docker container that you pushed to the environment. Like in this particular case, like using Kubernetes on staging, for example, doesn't really make a lot of sense, but for the production, of course. So, and then in Kubernetes, you can say, okay, we kind of clone this container and we create several virtual servers that users will connect to. This you will have to employ the load balancer to wrap this up probably, but this will allow you to increase resilience of your project. That's where Kubernetes comes into play. But again, unless you really have a problem with scalability of your application, you probably don't need to think about Kubernetes. But Docker, it's probably a good idea to start packaging your application with Docker right away, because it will make the release technically when should you employ Docker? It's when you're done with your code. It is verified that it runs without problems, so the tests pass. So you just package this, and that's when after you create this package, you release it to different environments. Right. So that makes things simple and easier, because you might just face this like works on my machine problem where it does work on your machine, but once it is deployed to the production or staging environment, because the environment is completely different to the one on your machine, your project doesn't work or is broken. So you want to make sure that the environment is the same, and that's what the Docker is for.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, because for me, this light bulb moment came when I first discovered that, wow, if I'm working on some sort of project where a lot of people need to be onboarded, right? Wow, that's just great. They can just pull a Docker container and then it just works.
Exactly.
I don't have to install anything. It's just there. It was incredible when I actually
it's super. I personally really like Docker. It allows to simplify things significantly.
Mm-hmm. So there is a question that came from, a note from Andrew. Not a question, but we've had a lot of success using a platform called Aptable. They handle the AWS resources and securing the endpoints across multiple environments. All runs on Docker containers, so it's quite scalable. Well, seems to be a very decent kind of use case for this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like so maybe just to kind of pull back a little bit. So when we're speaking about DevOps now, it seems like this is on the one hand, it's kind of a set of methodologies or practices that we can apply in our companies. On the other hand, it feels like, you need to sometimes, when it comes to scalability, infrastructure, you need to kind of have that backend skills and knowledge. So what kind of person would be a DevOps engineer? Would it be somebody who's living more on the backend, or someone who's living more on the front end, and do you really need to live on both?
Well, it depends on the definition of DevOps engineer. It's like, you see, as I said, the DevOps combines different stages of the project cycle. So I'm not sure what are the tasks of a DevOps engineer in real life. Like, what is the DevOps engineer? But I would assume in most advertisements and job offers, the DevOps engineer is meant to be the engineer that creates the CI/CD configurations. And that's not the DevOps engineer, really. This is the CI/CD configuration engineer. Because DevOps is much
getting
more
a little bit, how would I put it best? Like in the past, everybody was just a developer. Now you need a CI/CD configurator engineer.
This is the cool part. You don't really need a CI/CD engineer. Setting up a CI/CD is not really a rocket science. Like unless you're in a really big and very complex project, but technically. CI/CD, what is continuous integration? Continuous integration is exactly the automation of the verification of your code, right? So it runs the unit tests, it might run the functional tests, like
performance
integration,
tests, audits,
all sorts of tests. It's pretty like continuous integration belongs to the verification stage of the DevOps, right? So when the developer is done with code, they fire up the pipeline for continuous integration, and the pipeline does all the checks for the developer, so the developer doesn't need to do everything manual, right? And that's because, again, DevOps is all about automation. DevOps is all about increased velocity of the project and shortening the cycle for this development to feedback cycle. Right. So continuous integration is about verification. So it runs different tests. Continuous delivery is exactly about pushing things to those different environments. And then continuous deployment is actually automatically, like when things are verified on the in different environments, things are automatically pushed into the production if everything is okay. Usually, a lot of companies do not implement continuous deployment. It's more suitable for smaller projects where the cost of a mistake is pretty low, like personal sites, like when you're creating like a static site. But most of the companies prefer to stop at continuous delivery. So they manually have to verify on different environments, manually have to verify that things are actually working before pressing the button to merge the things.
Right. So maybe Denys, there's another question that actually came up into my mind now, because I've had these conversations over the last couple of weeks, and it's not necessarily kind of related directly to DevOps, but one question that did come up is, what about QA? Where should QA team live? Because when I look at some products, even of a pretty large size, sometimes I find it a little bit miraculous almost that there is no QA. It's just engineers kind of pushing to production eventually, and just basically that would be it, right? And sometimes it goes through this entire QA cycle, and sometimes there is even UX QA involved as well. And does it fit somehow? I mean, in general, what would be considered to be a best practice these days in products? Is it a kind of a more common thing to see that QA is dismissed in favor of DevOps automation? Or would you say that it's the other way around?
No, actually, QA can totally fine be part of the DevOps. When you're pushing your project to different environments, that's when the QA can step in and actually run the automated tests on those environments to see to actually check the QA related things. That's what we do at GitLab. So we have the QA teams, and they become like they are integral part of the development process, where we have tests on different levels. Like we have unit tests, we have integration tests, we have
tests.
And the QA tests. But since the QA tests are the most expensive ones, and for really large project, you really need a lot of the QA tests. It takes a lot of time to run them. So they are not part of the continuous integration. They are sort of the separate, and then you really want to test those things on the real environment, like let's say staging.
Yeah.
So that's why the QA is stepping in later in the process. But again, the tests are still automated. So once we push to some environment, the QA tests pipeline starts and the QA tests run. And again, always remember that catching the problems as close to right side, where developers still have context, is the cheapest way of solving the problem. The longer you wait to the left, the more expensive it will become. So we catch QA things somewhere here in the middle before we release to production.
Right. So would you say then that when you're looking at this, like the entire life cycle of a project, and if you have, let's say, designers involved, do you, so because there is also the notion of design ops now as well, right? It's like it's been like everything ops at this point.
Yeah, everything ops.
Everything ops.
Everything should be incorporated into the IT
so it's kind of all included in a similar way. So I'm wondering at this point though, so when does a company, be it of a small size, larger size, how does a company know that it absolutely needs some sort of DevOps process in place? Or what would be kind of a good warning flag or warning sign that, hey, maybe that's something to keep in mind or kind of to consider to change the culture and the way we work in a company?
This is a very, very tough question and not very straightforward, because, you know, every project is different and every project has different needs, just like any company. Like the DevOps process is purely for the software development, right? So we are talking about software products, because let's say Kanban can be used for pretty much anything, right? So you just it's planning, but DevOps is purely for the software products. So the question of when a company should consider DevOps is very interesting in terms of, as I said, some companies do use that or another part of DevOps cycle without actually realizing that they are using it. So let me give you just some random example, not real life example, because I'm very boring when it comes to real life examples, because I'm working for one company. I'm not in the consultancy industry. So every company needs to plan a feature. So they do have the planning stage, whether they realize it or not. Every company working with a software product has to implement that planned feature. So they do have the create or develop stage, whether they know about it or not. Then if they really care about quality, they have to have the verify stage where they run tests. Whether they do it manually, whether they run it in the continuous integration process, doesn't really matter. They do have it. Every company has to have the process of releasing the feature, right? So let's talk about just one particular feature. So the feature. Every company needs to release this feature in order for it to be available for the users. So the release stage is there as well. And every company has that or another tool for monitoring the project, the process after the feature is out. They either get the feedback from the users, or they have the automated tools like analytics or something like this to be notified once the problem arises. So whether the companies want it or not, whether they know about it or not, they already use different stages of the DevOps cycle. The trick is to set the mindset to the state where they want to automate this, because DevOps is all about automation. So as we had said this in this example, like the running tests, they might be run manually, they might be run automated, and when the problem is that once they are run manually, it's always the potential for human error. We run the tasks locally. Sometimes we forget to do this or something like this, and the problem can arise in the production. So in order to be assured that the code quality has been checked, the tests are run, it has to be automated. Once the developer pushes a pull request or merge request, whatever platform you're using. So the code that they push has to be checked for the potential errors. So this step is, to me, is no-brainer. This is beneficial for any company, any size of a project. So automating the tests is really beneficial. Then when it comes to releasing and automation of this step, and we are talking about DevOps and automation. So automating the release, that's not necessarily suitable for all projects, because technically it's beneficial for all projects, but not it's not easy for some project managers or engineering managers to consider that, okay, we are going to start using this Docker and push to different environments. Maybe the product doesn't need different environments. It's only like development and production. And they say, okay, we will just manually push. But again, while you're manually pushing, you sort of create the bottleneck. Let's say you have a very small company and you have only one backend engineer or a server architect, and they are sick. They are not in the office. So how are you going to release this? Are you going to call that person and just ask, like, yeah, I know you have temperature, like you have fever, but we have to release this thing. So once we talk about human interacting with the code, and this interaction is no more than just running a command. Running a command. This is the moment where that creates a bottleneck, and the same bottleneck can be automated and put into the DevOps cycle. So DevOps is all about running the commands that otherwise are run manually, just in the console or something like this. It's just running the set of commands that are otherwise run manually by people. And whenever a human being is involved, it's the bottleneck. And that's to me, implementing DevOps, even in some very short and condensed version, DevOps is beneficial for pretty much any size of the project.
Right, makes sense. One good question that came up from Andrew, and actually I had something similar on my list as well. Maybe let's talk about tooling for a moment. Andrew is wondering, what tools do you recommend to set up these automated tests? Selenium, or how do these tests change over time to keep up with continuous changes we are making? For example, if they have to be modified each release, is it really automated?
So this is a very good question. So yes, Selenium can be used for automation. Again, automated tests in terms of, like, there is two-folded thing here about automated tests. One is running them automatically after you make the push. That's the continuous integration. And then writing the tests so that they are automated, and then you can use Selenium. So Selenium is just the tool, right? And yes, you can write those tests and run them in Selenium. But if you have to modify a test with every change you make to the product, I have a suspicion that probably your tests are written wrong. So tests should, like, there are different levels of tests, right? So unit test has to make sure that the code in this particular like module or function works exactly as it has to. And it has to be, in order to create the successful unit test, you have to treat this as the black box. So you just test input and output, input, output, input, output. This allows you to not update the test every time you change the internals of this function or this module, because it still has to keep the same thing. Like, you give it some input, you get some output. And no matter what you do inside, these things should be constant. If they are not constant, this means that you have to either split your unit test and test this module in two different chunks, or somehow else reorganize the testing. But with unit tests, it's pretty straightforward. It's just input and output, no matter what you do inside this black box. Then we have the integration tests. These are a bit more complex. And in this case, you usually rely on headless browser, or, like something that is not full size as the QA, for example. So in this case, you test the integration of your module into the surrounding environment. So again, you test some things that have to be constant. So let's say, let's take a to-do application, right? So the task for the to-do application should be, if I type in this word and press enter, I should have this text shown under the search, under this input, for example. This is the task. This is like the high level algorithm of this task. And this should be the core idea of the tasks. So then whatever you do inside of your input, whatever you sort of convert the things and change the implementation, it should still follow this algorithm. Once this task fails, this means that the algorithm is failing. And this is where you actually don't update the test, but you go to the code and check why the algorithm doesn't work anymore. So in ideal situation, and again, like if we're talking about really big project, like again, GitLab, we have, I don't know, like several thousand tests, several thousand unit tests, maybe few less of integration tests, and pretty like many QA tests. So updating the tests every time would kill us. We would do nothing except for updating the tests. So writing the tests is a completely different topic, but the tests should run so that no matter what you do for your code, with your code, the algorithm is the same, remains the same, unless you change the feature. But then it's the intentional change. For the automated tasks, in this case, that's where Selenium gets into play. Like if you don't change the this contract, don't change this algorithm, the Selenium will just continuously run these tasks, and you will be notified every time you make a change or like push to your server. There are also things that you can automate, for example, using the Git hooks. So every time you make the commit, you might set your hook, commit hook, so that it will run the unit tests for you. Unfortunately, this won't be, this will take time, of course. So I don't advise this to do this on the Git hook, so that every time you can make a commit, the tests run and you get notified instantly about potential failure. But this might be too noisy, and the commit operation will take quite a lot of time. But I'm diverging pretty easily. But again, getting back to the original question. So Selenium is a really good tool for automated tests, in my opinion.
Right.
I could just answer this.
Yeah, well, but there are many more. Like there is Cypress as well for testing. And in general, what would you, maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about the tooling that you're using at GitLab? Like what would be, because I mean, you must be pretty much kind of deep into it at this point. So maybe there are certain things that you have discovered or your team has discovered recently that you started using a while back.
Technically, we don't use anything fancy. So our unit tests run on JavaScript, and Vue tests run on Jest. So since GitLab is the Rails and Vue application, so we kind of have to combine the things. So the tests for Rails part of the application are run with RSpec. For any front-end engineer, this is nightmare, but that's not something we can.
Yeah, I've spent a bit of time in the Ruby world, maybe like 1 hour, and then I decided to leave.
Run as far as you can, right? So RSpec is not the most engineer-friendly tool if you are coming from the front-end world. So RSpec and Jest for the front-end tests. We use Headless Chrome for integration tests, and for again RSpec for the QA tests for the full size thing. It's nothing really fancy there. And what is good about GitLab in particular, it's the open source product, right? So you can come there and check all the tooling that we use. So just check the package.json, and just you will figure out the whole world of GitLab, how it works.
Yeah, I'm very curious about the size of your node modules folder, but that's a separate story, I'm sure. Yes,
it's really, really big. And as I said, we have since we have Rails part and the Vue part, like JavaScript part, so we don't only have the modules for Node, right, or for Yarn in our particular case, but we also have modules for the Rails part. So the code base is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. Well, I will have another call apparently at 6, which I just got notification for, so I will have to wrap up a little bit earlier. But we still have a bit of time.
Yeah, let's talk about
DevOps. Dear friends, by the way, if you do have some questions that you'd like to bring up here, please do speak up or just send a message in the chat, and I'll be happy to bring it to Denys too. From my end, I do have a question. Basically, if somebody is now listening to you, is so excited about DevOps and cannot imagine a world or a life without DevOps, where would be a good starting point to kind of dive in and explore how it works and what you need to know and how to kind of make sense of it? Especially, I guess, in some organizations and companies where you have a very small team, you might want to improve your processes and kind of include this level of automation. Just don't even know where to start, and this is something that a small team can pull off. You know, where would you start?
I don't have any, any book or just one go-to resource in terms of DevOps. But the first thing that the companies should decide on whether they want to automate the process or not. And in most cases, the answer is yes, we do want to automate the process. So as I said, the core part of the DevOps, because without this part, DevOps doesn't exist. So is the CI/CD. And that's technically where you start. You go read about continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment. You decide for yourself whether you want to employ continuous deployment, because as I said, most of the companies with critical applications where a lot of users, like the big customer base, so they opt out of the continuous deployment and stop after continuous delivery, and then do this last step to production manually, because this is safer for them. This is another question that you have to answer. So first, you go read about the continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment. You decide whether you want to employ continuous deployment in your project. When you talk about continuous, there is one thing that you have to keep in mind. I saw some resources mentioning continuous testing. And remember one thing, there are only 3 C's: continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment. There is no such thing as continuous testing, because continuous testing is nonsense. It's just part of continuous integration. You run tests in your continuous integration. So only 3 C's. You decide whether you want to go for continuous deployment or not. And then you just try to take it step by step. So once you have basic understanding of the continuous integration, you just start implementing continuous integration. So on GitLab or GitHub, whenever you push your merge request, you want to, or pull request in case of GitHub, you want to set up CI/CD so that every time you make a push, your pipeline is running and checking your code. For GitLab, the CI pipeline is integrated in the product. For GitHub, I'm actually not sure. Probably you need to involve a third-party application like Travis, for example, to run the things for you. But here we sort of start diverging based on the tooling you want to use for your project, and like even to the very basic, like what is your hosting platform. If it's something other than GitLab, then you will have to include the third-party tools in order to run the things. If it's GitLab, then you have things baked in, including the auto DevOps. This is a brilliant thing, in my opinion. And I'm very skeptical about making so much advertisement for GitLab, but since I work for this company, I'm excited about different features that we have, and auto DevOps is one of those features. So just briefly about this. So if you have your code in GitLab the auto DevOps will be enabled for your project by default. So we will provide you with the basic, most common sense configuration for your CI/CD without you writing any configuration. So every time you push your code, the CI will be run for you. And then you can build on top of this and write different commands. As I said, the whole DevOps is just based on the commands that you run in your command line. So you can, the same way you can tune the continuous integration configuration so that it would run proper tests for you every time you make a push. And that's like, I remember my first experience with the continuous integration, where when I was doing the thing and then pushed the change to the server, and I saw, like, I could literally saw these tests running, passing, and it was really great feeling when you see this whole pipeline green. It gives you this, you know, very pacifying feeling.
Kind of confidence that this is always kind of going in the right direction.
This is like, I didn't break the thing. Yet. Yes, yet. Yeah, usually yet. But this is a very sort of you can treat CI as the pacifying tool for the whole product, for the management, for everybody. Because if everybody sees the green pipeline, everybody thinks, okay, we are fine. We have to be fine. Because this is only in the case that you have your tests properly written and they have been run. But that's another story. So this is the thing where you just should start as the first step into the DevOps, right? So again, you read about the continuous integration, about the 3 C's: continuous integration, delivery, deployment. Decide whether you want to do the deployment, and then you go on and start implementing the continuous integration.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Once you're done with that, you will be interested in taking it one step further and implement the continuous delivery. And then maybe you will be hooked, and you want to make the automated monitoring or automated security scanning integrated in your pipeline as well.
Right, we're getting all excited and all fancy about everything automated at this point. So that's probably a little bit everything that we could cover today in this short hour that we had. But I heard rumors, well, it's not rumors because it's true, that Denys is running a DevOps masterclass in May. So if you're interested, I just pasted the link. So feel free to join in. This is going to be quite a lot of fun. Just, you know, diving all the way into DevOps. I don't think, how are we going to get out of it once we are in there in DevOps world? I'm not so sure anymore.
DevOps is one of those things that once you try it, you never want to go back. So this is very, very contagious. So well, if you are attending the workshop.
Exactly. I'm going to give up, kind of to look into if we can keep that promise. With this in mind, I think thank you so much, Denys, for joining us. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us as well. We will have a few other smashing hours coming up in the pipeline as well, so please stay tuned. In the meantime, thank you so much for your time. And Denys, I'm looking forward to see you in May.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here.
See you in May.
Bye, everyone. And bye, Denys.